Welcome back to The Break. My name is Sam Gituku.
And my name is Zinzi Kibiku. If you're just joining us, you found us in the middle of a conversation. And the issue, of course, front and center stage is famine. Sam has interesting graphics that we'd like to show you so we can continue the conversation from there, Sam.
Right, and I'm still facing trouble whether to call it famine or not. I think famine has a totally different definition, but we know that certain Kenyans are hungry. And we know their number. They are about, if you can look at those slides, there are about 1.1 million Kenyans across the country who are facing starvation. And out of these, 19 counties are affected. The pastoral counties that are worst affected are 12, and the marginal agricultural counties affected are 7. So let's just take a look at some of those. In Turkana County, there are 192,000 citizens there that are facing starvation. Mandera County, there are 88,000. In Garissa, there are 86,000. In Wajir, there are 72,000. In Baringo, there are 73,000. That's just a sample of the counties that are affected. But in June last year, June 14th to be specific, the Cabinet Secretary in charge of National Treasury, Henry Rotich, spoke and said that the Cabinet has also approved the National Drought Emergency Fund for timely mobilization of resources to fund intervention, mitigation, and recovery. Timely mobilization of funds. What happened to timely distribution of food and intervention mechanisms to these counties?
Are you asking me a question?
Yes.
Great. Just before we went on the break, we were discussing about distribution or release of monies. We can see Honorable Rotich release some money. And for Kenyans, we raised about 200 million shillings. There was an M-Pesa pay bill, and then there's the Kenya Red Cross, which also had mitigating measures against this drought. But there's a question of accountability. Right? I believe there shall be fatigue from Kenyans to donate further monies, yet there's been no accountability for the first batch of monies that were collected, right? And I think, like I said earlier, we need to stop collecting money for famines, for drought, because this is an expected natural disaster. So, when we had the floods last year in May, as we said, why did we, I beg your pardon, the drought, why did we not commence building dams then, right? We cannot be having a scandal about money for dams, then there is starvation. That is absolutely, those are crimes of, I dare say, of the persons who are dying now, right? The bodies responsible should be charged with their deaths, right? The Ministry of Devolution, you knew that there was going to be, after global warming, right? There is global warming, right? Temperatures of 50-something in winter, minus 50-something for winter in the US. It was going to happen that there would be drought in Kenya. There would be lots of sunshine in Kenya. So why did we not plan? I am big on saying, and I will reiterate, somebody dropped the ball. It is a high time persons are held responsible. This time next year, right, we're singing the same song, then we're the fools, right? There needs to be, who in the Ministry of Devolution got the information from the Meteorological Department? Did they act on it? Is there a paper trail that they told the right persons? Let us see some action being taken, right? Collectively, we should have done water collection, but what happened when you were given the 4 warnings?
Of course, when such situations come up, Mheshimiwa, which is that we hear a lot of declarations and promises being made. I remember that last year, as we covered the flood situation in several parts of the country, including the coastal side, Tana River counties and others, we were told that the government was going to invest in water harvesting so that all that water is stored and can be used for irrigation. We have a government that gave a manifesto of tens of dams that were to be constructed, of irrigation schemes that were to be started to ensure that we have 1 million acres under irrigation. 6 years down the line, or if you're talking about 2017, 2 years down the line, we still don't see them successful. I mean, what happens in management of public affairs that you can make a promise and not be in a position to fulfill it to deal with such situations like we have now?
I think it's pure recklessness. I think every year we do things and we plan based on crisis. We just like to live from one crisis to the other. There is no reason why, for example, we have the Water Harvesting Authority. We put money into it. Members of Parliament passed this act. I think recently, Chris, we also passed a law in which we talked about water harvesting should be not a law but a motion. Water harvesting in every constituency. very soon we'll be having hundreds and thousands of tons of water running into waste into the oceans. And yet we're talking about dams not yet constructed 2 years after we procured them. I think for me it's pure recklessness, and it's really just the question of we plan for money that 30% of which goes into corruption. Nobody really thinks what will happen next year. So I think it's time we put these institutions to account. Water Harvesting Authority, what do you do? People like Galana Kulalu, somebody should be in jail. Galana Kulalu, Kulalu Galana. Somebody should be in jail.
Absolutely.
Why was this hyped so much that this is the end of our starvation and food security and all these things, and there was all that drama and hype, yeah? And then all of a sudden, I mean, it's really just another white elephant.
And that Honorable Watch, let me pick it up from there. You've very well brought in the Galana project.
Yes.
If my memory serves me right, it was about 7 billion Kenyan shillings in terms of making it. The Jubilee government sold it to us. We thought this is a fantastic project. The maize farm will do amazing. Uhuru Kenyatta would have achieved food security as we know it. But that's not the case. An Israeli government, Israeli company that was in charge of that even had to leave. And I think about 5.9 billion had already been paid. So Gabriel Mudhama, here we are. You were talking to us about China,
right.
And we were even discussing California and how they've managed it as well. What is it with Kenya? Is it our implementation? What is it that ails projects in Kenya, apart from the obvious corruption?
Right.
Is it our implementation?
You see, we've always squared it on planning and implementation. But to me, this morning, I think I'll square a huge chunk of the blame into the counties. The reason why I'm saying this is because I think, honestly, Wakili, I think those are the people who dropped the ball. Why am I saying this? One, when we said that devolution is the piece that must work for this nation, we believed that information should trickle down or trickle up, either way how you choose it, from the ward level coming to the constituency level. If the government has actually released funding to these counties, we need to ask, why did they not invoke the internal mechanisms to ensure that this situation is arrested as far as last year, right? And unless you're saying, or they come out to the national government and say, no, you are to blame because you never released the funds. We just did a very, I mean, as a country, we saw in Kirinyaga, where these counties which are actually deemed to have, you know, gotten this situation, and I'm not saying it's not, I mean, I'm not saying that it's not a natural, you know, when you talk about the scorching sun and things like this, the global warming, but the plans and the implementation process was actually there. For them to go to Kirinyaga, I would have thought the devolution conference, this should have been taken quite a huge chunk on matters conversation and discussion.
Gabriel Muthuma, let me interject there so that we can listen to Richard from Kapsabet. Richard, good morning. What's your question or comment?
Good morning, panelists. How are you?
Morning. Fine, thank you.
Yeah, let me start from where Gabriel has just left from. And I'm thinking the issue to do with food security in Kenya is not taken seriously. 50 years down the line, Kenyans are still suffering. Why? It's because the policy makers and the policy implementers are being crowded by corruption, the monster. So what we need to do, the way the panelists are discussing this morning, it is not a question of just forming policies the way our brother Chris there is talking about. It is a question of following down into the full function. And the monster corruption is what we should be talking about this morning when it comes to this issue or to do with drought. Drought is a natural disaster, and the way Madam has just said there, it is now becoming a national disaster where no one is taken seriously.
All right.
The office of the president, the parliament, together with the various county governments, must be held accountable to the issue of food insecurity in this country. The other thing that I'm talking about is...
Yes, Richard.
Yesterday yes.
Karen, just finish your comment.
Yeah. Yesterday you were talking about issue to do with corruption. And it is now coming in again to affect another part of another section, and that is the food insecurity in this country. We need a dictator in this country. We don't need political psychopaths the way we are saying in this country. We need a dictator to put this country in place. No issue to do it one. No, it should stop.
Okay.
Kenyans are suffering.
All right, thank you so much, Richard Collin from Kapsabet. And I want to toss it to you, Dr. Chris Omalwa. Everyone says it's corruption, but don't you think that we are sort of clothing this monster to say that whatever happens wrong is corruption? Don't you think it's time that we now have say that we have specific targets that certain departments or certain officers must meet, whether there is corruption or not? Absolutely. And to me, I not just mention corruption, it's also to do with the leadership. That's why initially we say there's a disconnect between planning and implementation. If I take you back during the days of President Mike Kibaki, when there was this Vision 2030, when you look at the Vision 2030, we have the clear pillars, we have the indicators, we have the targets, we have the objectives, which is clearly in terms of measurability. But now when you talk of food security, look at the Big Four agenda in this country. That's why I say this Big Four, it's a PR exercise. Because when you look at the food security and go to the budget policy statement, the budget policy statement is supposed to give key priority areas that the government is supposed to fund. And when you look at the Big Four and the budget policy statement that we discuss in Parliament, there's a total disconnect. So this Big Four is just PR. But you guys are not able to see that when you're planning the budget policy. Now, what happens, us as parliamentarians, we debate and we expect the executive to put into implementation the issues that we're putting across. That's what I'm asking. For instance, you just say that you do not see, you see a disconnect between Big Four agenda and the budget statement. Yes. So isn't there a possibility, you have a budget office, you have a budget committee, isn't it possible for the representatives of the people to put the aspirations of Kenyans together? Now, I was coming to that. Now, we raised these issues at the budget policy statement. Last week, there was a division of revenue bill. Division of revenue bill, it's a bill that divides the national revenue vertically between the national government and the county government. Now, what happens after that has been done? When it comes to when you're doing budgets, you need to allocate high amounts of money on these pillars of the government, like food security. But I'm saying there's a disconnect. For instance, when we talk of food security, there are things like fertilizer. The government said it's not providing subsidized fertilizer to the farmers. So you are killing the food security. So this is just PR. In this government, in this country, we don't have that seriousness. We bring in issues for purposes of PR. I only saw seriousness during the Kibaki time. When he was talking about the Vision 2030, we could see a clear framework, policy indicators when it comes to measurability. Right now, you cannot measure anything. And this is a wake-up call to the Treasury. Because normally what happens, Treasury is supposed to give a feedback to the Kenyans that in the last financial year, this amount of money was allocated, these are the indicators, this was achieved, this was not achieved. But they don't bring it.
Dr. Chris, just hold that thought so we can also bring in a caller. Daniel, good morning. You're calling in from Kericho. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am fantastic. Please, what's your comment or your question to the panel?
My comment is that the government was saying they want to build a pipeline from Turkana to Mombasa. Why can't they do the same for water?
All right, yes.
Yes, especially from areas around Rift Valley where we have a lot of rivers.
Yes.
So that they can take those water to those arid areas.
Okay.
Another place is Kwale County, which I see is one of the areas which was affected. There are two rivers which are passing there. They pour their water to Indian Ocean. I think River Tana and Happy. Yeah. I don't know why every time we need these white people to come and intervene for us.
Thank you, Daniel.
And then finally, I have some issues with Turkana. I don't know why can they employ an expert either from these developed countries so that they can take care of that county, because one was given 7 billion.
All right.
And then suddenly I heard that almost 4 billion were returned to the Treasury again. For what?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That is Daniel calling from Kericho. Omalwa, he has a very good point. Yeah. The fact that when it comes to oil, in the same county, Turkana, we are creating a pipeline. Absolutely. When it comes to water, it's different. Anthony, you already wanted to jump on that?
I wanted to jump into this extent, saying that I think this, because like you're saying, we are going round into corruption and money has gone here, we planned here, it didn't work out. I think it's institutional failure.
Correct.
At 3 levels. He's mentioned one. I think it's simply and purely a question of failed leadership. Leadership at the national level, leadership at the county level, and I think even in Parliament. We cannot escape the responsibility. We do division of revenue, but we do have something called the implementation committee, and it's our work to oversight. I think periodically Parliament ought to be asking for measures, tell us, give us reports, we're going into this phase, we gave you this money. Do we do that follow-up? We have an implementation committee that should be working on those gaps. The problem is that we have an executive to whom we divide money to, and then there is a gap and a disconnect where when you summon these people to come and you want to oversight them, they are either arrogant, unavailable, or they send you junior officers. Either way, that gap still should be filled by Parliament. If there is a gap and Parliament can operate as a high court to the extent that you can issue summons and give sanctions. We have refused to use this tool. The moment you want to touch CSX, the community and the side of the coalition will come and say you cannot touch this person. But we have the final say on how we can hold these institutions to account, because it is the institutions that have failed.
We need to take a look at some of the feedback on SMS before we can move to another topic, if we have that. This is who? Anonymous, you don't leave your name. It's very important to say who you are so that we can acknowledge you. It's disturbing to see fellow Kenyans die of hunger, yet the government is still in denial. If there is enough food, then where was it? Did they have to wait for disaster to strike?
All right. Let's take a look at another SMS. Comment from Eldoret. You say the first place of call to address drought and other challenges bedeviling the common citizen is the county leadership. However, some of the governors use nepotism as a prime criteria for employment. One cannot expect such caliber of human resources to be thoughtful enough to enact meaningful and sustainable policies. Let's not look far for the enemy.
Well, quite some views there. Thank you for texting us on 22422 and tweeting us at Citizen TV Kenya at @Zinzi_K. Let's take a look at another topic. You want to take us there?
Right. That's the second topic that we would also want to take a look at is on page 6 of the Daily Nation this morning. Looks like the DCI, George Kinoti, has responded to a few of those remarks from Deputy President William Ruto that he made over the weekend, saying the DCI should focus on other matters and not corruption. Yet, according to the National Police Service Act of 2011...
National Police Service.
Yes, National Police Service Act. The functions for the DCI are as follows. It means providing in criminal intelligence and undertaking investigations into serious crimes, including homicide, human trafficking, money laundering, terrorism, economic crimes, piracy, and organized crimes. Of course, Ruto had mentioned the fact that the EACC should be left alone to fight matters graft. Let me come to you, Carolle Maina.
Yeah.
Are you for the same school of thought? Do you think the DP was right when he said that the DCI should handle, and I quote, petty issues and let the EACC handle matters graft?
Thank you, Zinzi. In Kenya, we ascribe to the doctrine of separation of powers. Right? And what is separation of powers? There's the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. Now, when we have one arm of government belittling another arm of government, and trying not to inspire confidence in another arm of government, it's very scary if we go down this path. We can almost draw a parallel with what is happening with the US government. When Trump was demanding absolute loyalty from James Comey, the former FBI head, when he was demanding absolute loyalty from Comey, and then when Comey did not comply, he fired him, right? And this is the great US of A. Now, and if you follow what's happening, say with in the White House, where if you don't toe the line, you get out. Now, similarly, if we draw a parallel with what's happening here, when the Deputy Vice President begins to advise the
Did you say Deputy Vice President?
I beg your pardon. Deputy President, I stand corrected. The Deputy President begins on national TV to advise and direct the DCI do petty matters. That takes us back 20, 30 years, right? We cannot go down that path. With respect, each incumbent in separate offices needs to respect the other. In fact, I'm actually very disappointed that the DCI would then take the bait and respond, right? He was baited and he responded.
Shouldn't he have not responded?
No. Let your results speak for you.
Gabriel,
do your job.
You also agree with Carol?
Yes. 110%.
The DCI.
He was baited. He was absolutely baited.
You cannot reply.
Yes.
And this is something I saw happen one time when some politician said something and the Chief Justice took on to reply. You don't reply to politicians. You know, albeit the fact that the presidency is, you know, an active political space. You really do not. You have your mandate, which, as you've put clearly, which stipulated very well within the National Police Service. You have the core functions of the DCI, the EACC, and the DPP. So you follow that strain of thought. If you are following somebody, do not be side or hoodwinked by what politicians are saying. So you should run away from that. What I think comes head over heels from what Kenyans are talking today is it's what we read today, saying, you know, about the big fish. And probably this is where, you know, I would recommend, or I would commend the DCI, where he's taking this country. You know, for far too long, this issue of corruption, we've said we need somebody who can, at the very least, get some people who we know or who we call the big fish. If he attains this, and I'm not talking about some, I want to hear me well on this one, because we've been taking people to court back and forth, and after that they get their bail and they continue to do their work. I am talking about serious jail terms. What Kenoti has said, committee, that to me makes my day. Let those people languish in committee so that we see. From the Wanjiko point of view, things are happening. Other than that, it will be a sideshow, because you'll be taking people to court. Tomorrow they are released, they go back to what they were doing.
Actually, if I can add on to that, when you're charged, and when you're charged, say, if somebody will be found culpable and they're taken to court, it is not enough to step aside. It is not enough to step aside, right? It is honorable. Remember in Finland, when they did not meet, I beg your pardon, in Finland, when they did not meet the criteria for the health, for providing health for all, the government resigned. Right? It should be in law that there will be mandatory resignation, irrespective of don't step aside and hope to come back. And if I can add on to what you're saying, the previous day, Senator Markham, and our fellow colleague, he was actually, he began the onslaught. On the DCI, this is what you should be doing. And it's telling that the very next day, the vice president then says DCI. It was a whole ploy that they were doing, and then the DCI then falls for the bait. He should not have. Do your job.